Good morning and welcome to Health Talk here on AM 1270 and 96.5 FM KXVX. Paul Thomas and Bill Kearney in the studio. Bill of Northlake Medical Pharmacies. And you survived Christmas.
I did.
Yes, you're here to tell about it.
It was a great Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I came in and still got some more Christmas to put up. And went and got my...
Wait, last time we were at 10 trees. Did we go beyond 10 trees?
No, we still had 10.
Stayed at 10, okay.
We got an extra Santa Claus and an extra angel or something on the Christmas Day. It was delivered. So anyway, we had family that come from every place but Eureka, and part of them came Christmas Eve day. We opened presents Christmas Eve. Then Christmas morning we had some more family, and the other family stayed, and we opened their presents. And then a half a day later, another group of that family came, and we opened presents. And then
now, do you guys do inter-family presents? Like, do all the families buy presents for all the other families?
Well, I think we're going to stop that.
Yeah, we stopped doing that.
Families are getting too big. I mean, we have 10 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, and it gets to be a pretty expensive proposition. And then they feel like they have to buy something for you, and we've convinced most of our kids that that isn't really necessary.
We buy for the kids, you know
Yeah.
what I mean, and the grandson. But as far as like my brothers and sister and their family, we don't buy anything for them anymore. Whereas a few years back when we were still going down to San Jose to my mom's, we kind of felt like an obligation to do it because everybody was still buying for everybody else, and then finally we just said enough of it. It's too much.
Well, it's hard to. It's hard to do, and then the gifts you get. My wife always gets me some electronic thing that I don't know how to take care of.
Sure.
I got an Alexis Echo. Tried to program that. It's still sitting there. I got a weather station from her brother, and it's still sitting there. And I got some deck lights for my new deck. That are all electronic, and it's still sitting there.
Well,
so,
you got things to look forward to, So
I got a couple of shirts, and I could handle those.
Yeah,
I knew what to do with those. And then I did laundry. All the kids came, and they were, of course, it was too cold to go in the pool, so they went in the hot tub.
Sure.
So that was 2 or 3 times a day, and a new towel every time.
Oh, yeah.
Then we had a tradition. We have a tradition on Christmas Eve where my wife, Dana, makes homemade chicken and noodles soup. So that's what we had on Christmas Eve. And then on Christmas Day, we had prime rib. And I had been a long time since I'd done a prime rib, and my wife doesn't like doing it in the oven because it makes the oven so messy.
So did you do it on the barbecue?
I did it on the barbecue, and I
turned out well.
Yeah, I barbecued it at 500 degrees for 25 minutes, and then lowered it to 300 degrees.
Oh yeah.
And came out medium rare.
Nice.
And I thought that was way too big a prime rib. It was a 5-bone prime rib, 10 pounds, and I think I've got 4 bones left and enough to make a sandwich. So, and then people ate chicken noodle soup.
We did, Christmas Eve we did lobster tails and crab cakes, and then Christmas Day we did ham, and then yesterday we had leftover Tuesday we had leftover ham sandwiches, and then yesterday, I guess yesterday was, last night we did like a bean and ham soup.
Oh,
Yeah, real good. Yeah, so we stretch ours, as far as we can. But your wife's going to be disappointed in us because yesterday I took every single Christmas decoration down.
Oh, you're kidding!
I did. Yeah, everything's down already. The outside, the inside, everything's done.
It was sure tempting. After everybody left, which was about noon, I just decided I wasn't going into work. The place, with that many people there, had to be cleaned up, and it was tempting for me to start taking
doing it. Yeah.
But we're we usually keep it up through New Year's and
Yeah.
sometimes through Super Bowl if we have a Super Bowl party.
Well, we're not going to be here this weekend, so I figured. And my wife is of the kind of she feels like Christmas gets thrown up in the room, kind of as you have said in the past.
Yeah.
And it is really surprising when you take everything down after having it up. We've had it up since it was that week after Thanksgiving I put everything up. It's like, wow, the house is so much bigger with everything out of it. That's kind of the feeling you get. And then, even the outside lights and all the decorations outside, you go, wow, the house looks so much cleaner out here.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
So it in that regard, it's a nice surprise. But I wasn't going to have time to do it this weekend because I'm out of town, and I just,
Well, it was going to take, it takes us 2 weeks.
Yeah, to
steady
get everything down.
to take it down.
Yeah.
And then reorganizing the storage shed and.
Yeah, I did that too yesterday. I reorganized the
Oh,
storage shed.
boy, you're
which
making
is-
me look bad. I'm glad my wife isn't listening. So, well, it's Christmas and it's over, and now it's New Year's, and everybody's sick. I can't tell you how many people are down with this flu right now.
And is it a stomach thing? Because that's what went through my house.
It's-
Celia had it last week, and Matthew was sick on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, throwing
Yeah.
up on Christmas Eve.
Some people are getting the stomach. Most of them are getting this really bad cough, and it is in some places the flu cases have spiked by nearly 800%. Arizona is one of those where they're up over 758% over this same time last year. And California is one that's got a huge increase. And we had people that were coming over Christmas Day, local people, and every one of them, 4 people in the family were sick. We went to a party on Saturday night, and some people couldn't come because they were sick and coughing. And there's not much you can do with this one that's a cough. You cough so hard that you feel like you're going to break a bone. And we suggest taking some of that Mucinex with guaifenesin, which is a cough suppressant with dextromethorphan in it, and take one of those every 4 hours and drink lots of water and use the cough lozenges, and it will certainly slow it down some. But you also get a sinus infection with this or it can be an infection, but it gives you a terrible headache. And like I was saying last week, I was taking aspirin at the same time I was taking a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, which both do the same thing, but where the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory I take for the arthritis pain, I took the other for a headache, and it worked very well. But the flu cases are higher than usual. The Center for Disease Control said that the virus has mutated from the southern hemisphere and has caused a huge change in what the flu virus looked like. A majority of the influenza A samples identified in the new report were viruses which is the strain that was dominant in Australia. And although that strain has been the most common so far here, it's still too early to tell. But Australia had a terrible, potentially started out as a potentially bad flu season and became a bad flu season because it was hit very, very hard. And they predicted early on that it would impact the United States in a similar manner, and they were right. So we're trying to get a new flu vaccine that some suggest you only have to take once. It hasn't been approved yet, but there's a good reason that it could be. And if that happens, that will certainly reduce the amount of deaths and hospitalizations due to flu. When you get the cold or when you get the flu, people are wanting to know how contagious it is and when is it contagious and when it isn't. It isn't just solely symptomatic, so meaning that when you have the symptoms isn't the only time that you are contagious. It's one thing to endure the sniffles and sneezing and sinus pressure, but it's another thing entirely to spread your suffering to the whole office. So when exactly is it safe to exit your quarantine or your home? And it's not as simple as reading your symptoms. Your illness window is much smaller than your contagious window. If you have a cold, you're contagious for 1 to 2 days before your symptoms. And since you can't see the future, that isn't all that helpful for the 2 weeks after you were first exposed to the virus. So for the flu to become contagious a day before the symptoms start and stop being contagious about 5 to 7 days after you're first ill with the symptoms. So at least a couple of days before and 5 to 7 days after. And when it comes to the stomach virus, which some of the people are getting now, the window for being contagious before you're ill isn't quite as defined, but you remain contagious, Paul, for up to 2 weeks.
Wow, afterwards?
Afterwards.
Wow, that's...
After you've made your recovery, not after you first getting symptoms.
Yeah.
So considering the brevity of the average stomach virus, that can be particularly dangerous for those around you. So if your ailment still falls within those ranges, it's probably best to invest in one of those surgical masks for everyone's sake. It is, somebody was at my house and they were sneezing and they put their arm over their mouth like you're supposed to. And I said, have you ever seen that advertisement with people coughing with the flu? It just spreads out in a fan-like. Stop touching things that could be contaminated. Stop licking the doorknobs and stay up to date with your shots. This flu season is going to be a doozy, and it is already. If you pay attention to the signals that your body's sending, you can actually help stave off a cold before it starts. And believe it or not, this works. I had somebody that I talked to yesterday said anytime they feel like they're getting the symptoms, it was my son-in-law, one of my son-in-laws, and he said, I just go take a nap when I come home and I feel like it's going to be there. So we're generally wired to try to push through any minor physical symptoms, but that's really our first mistake. We should really be listening to our bodies instead. You know that super tired feeling. We all get it, and that makes you want to sleep for days. It could signal that your immune system is weakening, so hit the streets and make sure to get a full night's sleep. Whether you're sleepy or not, it really pays to catch up on your sleep. That's exactly what happened to me. I felt like I hadn't slept in days, and I finally went home that third day, went to bed at 7 o'clock at night, got up at 7 o'clock the next morning, and I was on my way to getting better. It really pays to catch up on your sleep. And there was a study done by the Carnegie people that found that people who got fewer than 7 hours of sleep a night were almost 3 times as likely to get a cold than those who got more than 8 hours of sleep a night. If you've been with me very long on this radio show, you know that I, in the past, have slept very little. I used to average about 4 hours of sleep a night. I grew up that way on a farm, and it isn't nearly enough. And as you begin to get older, you realize that you need more sleep just to be able to fight off some of these things that you get when you're older, that normally your immune system when you're younger keeps you in pretty good shape and lets you fight it off. So remember last week we talked about the kids, that there aren't medications out there for kids 12 years and younger, and really for 6 years and younger. And the best thing you can do for them is to have them get as much sleep as possible. And I know that's not the easiest thing to do when you have multiple children, but it's something that we need to look forward to as using as a first line to protect them from really getting ill. There was a thing about when to worry about getting a fever and whether it's something you should be concerned about or not. And one of the things that hasn't really happened in a lot of severity is getting a fever with this flu. Although if it does come, it's usually fairly short and goes away, and you're left with the other symptoms. And very little is more challenging to a doctor than a patient who has a high temperature with no apparent cause. There was a story about one such patient that dates back to hospital training days in the early 60s when I was in pharmacy school, and there was a 77-year-old widow that was admitted with an unexpected fever of 6 weeks. Her doctors, some of the most eminent on their time, were mystified by her prolonged fever. Finally, at her insistence, that patient, who was Eleanor Roosevelt, was discharged to her New York City apartment, where she died weeks later. An autopsy showed that the cause of her high temperature was a rare resistant form of tuberculosis. The fact that nothing could have saved her only partially eased the frustration of those people who felt bad for not having arrived at a diagnosis early in her lifetime. Although her high temperature was caused by an uncommon illness, a fever is a marker for many disorders. That's important to know when you're running a fever. There were people that did have that consistency with the flu that disappeared rather quickly. But if you called your physician and you, the first thing they will ask you if you're talking about symptoms of the flu is, what's your fever? So I always tell our patients to always get your fever before you call the physician or their answering service and tell them what your fever is running, because it's important to know when you're running one. Although you can have chills and dry mouth and headache or night sweats that might make you suspect a fever, the only way to be sure is to measure your temperature with a thermometer. And the most convenient, practical way to do that as an adult is by mouth. If you do it rectally, and most of us don't choose to use that venue, usually rectal temperatures are 1 degree higher than an oral temperature. Although it's never a static 98.6, which we, when I took my wife into, because she had the flu here about a week or 2 weeks ago, her temperature was actually, and she had the night sweats, she had the headache, she had the dry mouth, she had the chills. Her temperature was actually 1 degree below 98.6. So it can vary by a degree or so during the course of a day. Most experts would agree that an oral temperature of 100 degrees or above constitutes an abnormal rise in the body temperature, and that goes for adults as well as kids. So, and you always wonder if you should call a doctor about a fever. By the way, our number is 263-5252. I had a lot of people ask me last week that they wanted to call in and didn't know the number, and I failed to give it as often as I should, 263-5252. So any fever that lasts more than 3 days, especially without any of the kind of symptoms we were talking about, merits a discussion with your doctor. So it's also very smart to consult a doctor about even a slight fever. If you have diabetes, if you have a heart valve disorder, or HIV, or any kind of immune disorder that affects your immune system, or if you're taking a medication that can reduce immunity, such as steroids. So if your infant of 3 months or younger has a fever of 104 or higher, 100.4 or higher, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends you call the doctor right away. If you can't reach the doctor, take the baby to an urgent care facility or an emergency room. When I was growing up, we would, especially being in the country where there wasn't a hospital close, you would put a child in a tepid bath and bathe them in a tepid bath to reduce the fever. Kids that are between 3 and 36 months should be evaluated for if their fever reaches 102, or they have a fever of 100 degrees Fahrenheit and appear ill with symptoms. Fussy or unwilling to drink fluids, for instance, or the fever lasts for more than 3 days. Children who have any fever and a new skin rash could also see a doctor. So when you don't know what it is, they're most often caused by viral infections, which are limited duration and they don't respond to antibiotics. It could be a bacterial infection, such as bacterial pneumonia or urinary tract infections, but sometimes it's just very hard to pinpoint. There's all kinds of studies about what kind of fevers are caused by cancers, which is notorious among the culprits is Hodgkin's lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Other usual suspects that doctors consider include cancers of the bile duct, kidney, and liver. I don't know if I printed it out, but while I'm talking about cancers, there was an article on CNN Health today that talked about a cancer drug, and I can't remember the name of it. It's for an acute lymphoma and brain cancer. It has gone from $45 a tablet to to $5 a tablet to $45,000 for a full treatment, which is probably 100 and some medications, so 100 and some pills. So again, these kind of drugs are going up substantially without any kind of control, and it's very difficult to afford to give somebody that kind of medication that's tremendously expensive and not covered by insurance. The ones that are the most common to have fevers are Hodgkin's lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that we talked about a few minutes ago, and about 20% of those turn out to be uncommon infections, such as bacterial endocarditis, which is a heart valve infection that can be fatal if not diagnosed in time. Abscesses of the liver or brain are now more easily diagnosed. My daughter was here. It's a school teacher, and she has a 13-year-old that only 100 people have ever been diagnosed with, and it's a form of acute lymphoma. There is no treatment for it. She is never had any problem with any disease state or anything before, and her parents are desperate trying to find out. They've had her to Mayo Clinic, they've had her to Stanford. One of those rare things that happens, and there's not much you can do about it. Back in the 80s, HIV and AIDS provided the key diagnosis of several previously rare infections that had high fevers and diseases of connective tissue, the glue that holds our cells together, such as lupus or polyarteritis, can cause fever long before the appearance of symptoms such as joint pain or rash. That can be said of inflammatory bowel diseases such as ulcerative colitis or regional ileitis. So sometimes antibiotics work. The very medications used to combat fever causing infections can cause fever themselves. Those include sulfa drugs. One of our, you don't know it as this, but one of our favorite drugs for a long time for urinary tract infections and nonspecific infections was sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim. That was Bactrim DS or Septra DS, and also nitrofurantoin for urinary infections, which was microdentine. And that treats urinary infections, and minocycline, which is a form of tetracycline, often used to treat rosacea. So today, with only hours separating countries from each other, a doctor should ask about preceding 6 months of travel. In the case of malaria, is still the #1 killer worldwide, and disease-causing organisms such as dengue and Zika to proliferate. Always seeking opening in our health defenses, adding to the complexity of identifying the cause of fever in any individual. We travel so much, go into different countries, have not built up immunity for those drugs, and then we get into a situation where we can't get out of it without being treated, and we don't really know what to treat it with. So as the complexity of healthcare continues to grow, we're going to have more and more issues of learning how to control it. So when we come back, we're going to talk about why 1/3 of the antidepressants are prescribed for something other than being depressed. As we near the end of another year, it's time to look forward and a time to look back. Hi, my name is Bill Kearney, owner of Northlake Medical Pharmacies. We want our customers to know how much their loyalty has meant to us. When it comes to price and service, our pharmacies can compete with our neighbors' chain stores. With our generic card program and our new Kmart customers, we can give you generics as cheap as our chain neighbors. With our free delivery service, charge accounts, and excellent customer service, we hope to be your pharmacy of choice. It's been a tough year for us physically, as well as for many of you. And of course, none of this would have been possible without our loyal staff of employees. Their dedication and loyalty to our business is what makes us all work. And none of this would be possible without you, our customers. Dan and I want to take this time to thank you for your support and wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Northlake Medical Pharmacies, with 2 locations to serve you, at Hill Road next to Sutter Lakeside Hospital, in the front of Brenna's Shops Mart in Lakewood.
This is the Caltrans Road Information Bulletin for Lake and Mendocino County State Highways for the week beginning Friday, December 22nd. There will be no planned work the 22nd through the 25th in observance of the holiday, but crews will respond to emergencies. In Mendocino County on Route 1 near Millbank Resort, expect 5-minute delays. On Route 20 near Willett Cemetery Road on the 26th and 27th, and company could cause 5-minute delays. On Highway 101 near Ridgewood Ranch Road, expect 15-minute delays, and near the Hermitage Vista Point, expect 10-minute delays. On 175 near the Lake County line, expect 10-minute delays, and on 271 near Marion Lane, weekdays, a company could cause 5-minute delays. That wraps up the Caltrans Road Information Bulletin for Lake and Mendocino County State Highways. Please remember to check your route before you go online via QuickMap or by calling 1-800-GAS-ROAD. Please be safe out there and drive for the conditions on the road. And like us on Facebook for more updates and info on the type of work we're doing. That's Caltrans, District 1.
The Lake County City Area Planning Council is currently in the process of finalizing the Regional Transportation Plan for the Lake County region. A final public workshop is planned to provide interested community members an opportunity to comment on the draft Regional Transportation Plan. This meeting will be on Tuesday, January 9th at the Clear Lake City Council chambers. A copy of the draft Regional Transportation Plan can be found online at lakeapc.org. For more information, call 263-7799.
Raising your family, tending to your animals, growing your own produce, preparing for the seasons, living the country life. Hi, I'm Jody Henke, host of Living the Country Life. Catch me every Monday through Friday at 9:35 a.m. and 4:35 p.m. for ideas and inspiration for your place in the country. That's Living the Country Life here on AM 1270 and 96.5 FM KXBS.
We bring the community closer together, supporting business in every way. We're helping make your dreams come true, working hard for you.
The Lake County Chamber of Commerce would like to recognize their member of the month, Tom Lincoln from Lincoln Levitt Insurance Agency. Lincoln Levitt Insurance Agency insures hundreds of local and out-of-county businesses, providing such coverage as fire liability, business auto, workers' comp, umbrella liability, director and officer liability, and group benefits. It also provides a full line of insurance products to local farmers and agribusiness owners. To request an insurance review, Tom and his staff are located at 650 North Main Street in Lakeport. They can be contacted at 263-7162 or through the website at lincolnlevitt.com.
Lake County Chamber of Commerce, we're steady and strong, help us shape the future.
Don't worry, we're here. We're back.
We're back. We were talking about the excitement in town on Christmas Eve, Christmas night.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that.
And,
and
hate to see a business like that get destroyed as
Sure,
badly as
yeah.
that one was. But before we went on a break, we were going to tell you about some antidepressants that are prescribed for something else. And we've talked many times about drugs that are okayed by the Food and Drug Administration for a certain diagnosis and how it's not illegal to prescribe them for something else. There would be many cases where not one single drug would be used, and they would use a different one, such as a pain medication and for diarrhea and a problem that drugs can have significant side effects, such as leaving patients more prone to infection, so they use a different drug. So those are called off-label medications, and they it's not unusual for it to be prescribed for a disease that it hasn't been officially approved to treat, and the reason is it's so expensive for each diagnosis to get a drug approved for that specific diagnosis, and doctors all over the world are allowed to prescribe drugs off-label, and antidepressants are used for several conditions and diseases beyond depression, including migraine headaches, hot flashes, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and disorders of the digestive system. So off-label use means that more potentially effective treatments have a chance of becoming available in the medical practice, but it also means that drugs haven't been tested in critical trials or received approval from the Food and Drug Administration. So the potential downside in the case of antidepressants is that doctors won't know what possible risks are for those diseases that they haven't been okayed for. Bupropion, which has been around more than 30 years, has a pretty good track record for safety, and even so, aside from a few patients, very few people know that it might have a double life as a drug that's used for different things. Within 2 weeks of starting it, this patient was bleeding far less and had experienced no side effects. All of his bleeding stopped. It was in his gut. After using it to get his disease under control, he added another anti-inflammatory supplement and changed the diet to keep the ulcerative colitis from flaring up again. The drug has been successful in creating a functional cure for his disease. It's remained in remission since 2013. So it's been written about worldwide with colitis, and any good researcher declares his interest. If research papers is typical of what the author has written, then you want to clarify that you have a vested interest in making that occur more often. A lot of people, and including the author of this paper, had asked their gastroenterologist about trying that for colitis. But he waved it off as a mental health matter because it's typical for patients to get bupropion as an antidepressant. The psychiatrist was justifiably cautious, already taking a different type of an antidepressant for anxiety and sleep problems. Shows she wasn't sure about giving a drug that could cause insomnia, but since you can get off of it very quickly, its side effects weren't intolerable, and they were willing to give it a try. So some people it's not a miracle cure for. It didn't, in the case of ulcerative colitis, this patient didn't have to go to the bathroom as many times each day, and as for side effects, they didn't have insomnia, did not feel jittery. Those side effects quickly subsided that he had, and have continued to take the medication. It seems surprising in one sense that an antidepressant should work on other diseases, but perhaps it's time for us to look at these things and stop thinking them as an alternative drug and one that we can't use. I'm just thinking of a beta blocker that I take for high blood pressure, and it is called atenolol. There are beta blockers. I also have a disease called essential tremor, and when I get tired, my hands shake like I'm nervous, but it has to do with a neurological thing, and I take one of those atenolol twice a day, once for the blood pressure and then at evening for the essential tremor, and it works on the essential tremor. Not actually used or not diagnosed as that, not approved by the FDA for that. Also, beta blockers are used to treat stage fright, anxiety, without being a narcotic. There was all kinds of studies have been done by scientists on trying to use different medications for different disease states that they aren't diagnosed with. One of those is Reglan, which is used for motility of the intestinal tract. It moves things further down the intestinal tract. It was used for GERD, gastric esophageal reflux disease, because instead of the food coming up into your throat area, it would be like a little escalator and move food further down the intestinal tract, so it wouldn't do that. The story about how doctors discovered new uses for any of these things is usually about the same. They try something, and on depression, they tried it after taking probably other drugs that were used for the same thing, and then they try something that's maybe treating the side effects and see if that's effective. And if it is, they use it in conjunction with duloxetine, which is Cymbalta, has indications for mental health disorders and nerve pains such as fibromyalgia and osteoarthritis. The complexities of how people respond to pain mean that one drug doesn't work for everybody, but so other antidepressants are often used off-label to treat pain. Duloxetine is also an antidepressant. Some people assume they will have a profound effect on their mood and will drug them up. Others think that they may have suffered pain for many years, can be defensive if they suggest an antidepressant. I was at the point with my essential tremor and the neuropathy in my hands at night that I couldn't pick up a book, I couldn't pick up a pencil, and I didn't want to take gabapentin which is specifically a neuropathic drug that's used for that, but can cause some side effects. When I was still practicing pharmacy, I didn't want to have a reduced mental capacity that some people have when they're taking gabapentin. So I started on the duloxetine, or the Cymbalta, and worked very well. So I no longer have to wear, excuse me, the arthritis drugs, the arthritis gloves, and I have a very limited amount of neuropathic pain in my hands. Of course, a growing body of evidence suggests that one or more effective treatments for pain is behavioral therapy as well. So lots of people are in favor of changing the way people think about pain to change the way it feels. And so there's a lot of research and development into instead of adding a pain medication or an antidepressant medication to your portfolio of medication, that you go through some behavioral therapy with a psychologist or a psychiatrist and learn to treat pain better. I have a sister that has was born with a congenital hip disease. Went to the University of Iowa when she was 4 and 5 years old. It was so unusual at the University of Iowa, which is a research hospital, that I think they did 22 surgeries on her hip, and she's still in a lot of pain. She's now 77 years old and walks with a cane or a walker. She still has pain, but not nearly to the extent it was, and she was on fentanyl for a long period of time, and also on oxycodone, and now is not on any opiate whatsoever. And she says I take acetaminophen at bedtime when I go to bed, and then if I have a breakthrough, I take another one, or at 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning. So here's somebody that's had a terminal disease that was born with it and still has it, and still has gotten off the opiate medication and got on a just plain acetaminophen and an antidepressant that has helped her handle the pain. It's kind of rare when we use the name of an antidepressant, because they block a certain neurotransmitter pump. Whenever we call it a serotonin agent, a clog for neurotransmitter pumps, something entirely different. The drug is doing what it's supposed to do in the brain, and you will hear us refer to SSRIs. That's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and I don't expect you to remember that either, but it has to do with feel-good drugs. So the drugs that make us feel better with antidepressants is serotonin and norepinephrine, and we have some antidepressants that add both, or some that promote both, and some that don't use that at all. The tricyclics that we used to use years and years ago, which were amitriptyline, and we still augment pain control with using those in addition to a pain medication, and it's been very effective. These antidepressants can also supplement cancer treatment. They dramatically increase appetite in people with cancer and prevent the appetite suppression associated with the disease. But like many insights from off-label prescribing, the idea remains intriguing and, for the moment, obscure. So no one is going to fund research like the kind that we're talking about here. It's not what people expect, and it's not what people will give you money to do. There's already all those antidepressants on the market. When they're bringing them on the market, they normally can give you a reason to give you research money on the promise of what it's going to do in the future. Once the drug is released, it is certainly an advantage to have a new diagnosis used to treat it, but not to the effort that it is if it's never been on the market yet. So this one kind of disturbed me, and about everything I talk about here, it seems like I've taken or am taking. There is a common blood pressure drug that's tied to the increase of skin cancer. And when I saw the article, I thought, what could that possibly be? Because I take a common blood pressure pill. I take 2 of them. And this was a certain water pill prescribed to control fluid retention and treat high blood pressure. And you've heard me explain how that works. The water in the system puts pressure around the blood vessel, the artery or the veins, and decreases the diameter of that blood vessel. And so when your heart has to go pump the blood through it, or the blood has to return to the heart through it, it's restricted because the diameter of the blood vessel is smaller than usual. So the heart has to work hard to pump that blood through. And it may make people more likely to develop 2 types of skin cancer, which luckily neither one of them is melanoma, basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma. These researchers examined prescription data on hydrochlorothiazide, and that's one of the fluid pills, and it also comes as Maxide, which is triametrine and hydrochlorothiazide. And this study was done from 1995 to 2012, as well as cancer registry records on skin malignancies from 2004 to 2012. And overall, people who took HCTZ for at least 6 years were 29% more likely to develop basal cell carcinoma and almost 4 times likely to get squamous cell carcinoma than people who didn't take this medication. We already knew that it makes skin more vulnerable to damage from ultraviolet light. So we always tell people when we dispense hydrochlorothiazide to be very wary of what sunlight can do. And it's what we call a photosensitivity reaction, where the sun causes you to burn much quicker when you're on HCTZ than it does if you're not. Other drugs will do the same thing, including birth control pills. We don't know that HCTZ use does not appear to translate into an increased risk of non-melanoma skin cancer. So the study included more than 71,000 people, and that's what makes me take a look at this more serious. With basal cell carcinoma and patients 8,600 with squamous cell carcinoma, and a control group of more than 313,000 in a Danish population, which are quite fair-skinned, who didn't have those malignancies but were otherwise similar to cancer patients. About 2.7% of the patients with basal cell carcinoma and 2.1% of the control group were high users of HCTZ, with a lifetime cumulative dose of at least 50,000 milligrams or 6 years of use. 10% of the carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, were high users, such as 2.8% in the control group. With the highest cumulative HCTZ exposure, 24 years of daily use, the patients were 54% more likely to develop basal cell carcinoma and more than 7 times more likely to get squamous cell carcinoma. This study wasn't a controlled experiment, and that's the one thing that I have against it, designed to prove whether or how it might cause skin cancer. My guess is people taking it did not take precautions, such as using a a skin protection factor for to protect them against being photosensitive. So there was limitations, I guess we would say, on the two main factors, ultraviolet light exposure and the skin type. There may be a relationship between taking HCTZ and risk for skin cancer. However, the relationship may not be directly caused by that. And we don't know that. And so here we have a pretty serious article on what a very basic common blood pressure medication is. In fact, this is something that we start people on as on a diuretic as their first chance of having high blood pressure. We ask them to take HCTZ and see if that takes care of it, because chemically all it does is get rid of the extra fluid in your system as far as helping your blood pressure. If that's really what's causing your edema or the swelling, then it's a pretty unnoxious type of a drug. Everyone can reduce the skin cancer by avoiding unprotected exposure. So don't use indoor tanning devices, and protect yourself from the sun by seeking sunscreen with an SPF of 30 or higher. And you shouldn't stop using HCTZ without first seeing your doctor. While there are other safe, affordable options to managing high blood pressure, if you're already taking HCTZ, won't meaningfully alter the skin cancer risk by staying on the drug for a few months until a physician can advise you. Now, again, there isn't cause and effect here that we know. So I caution you about taking this information, and I don't discredit you from going to your physician and ask him or her if you should continue on the HCTZ, but I would be curious. As I said, that's one of the drugs that I take in a combination drug, and I'm fairly dark complected. These were all Danish people. That doesn't mean I can't get basal cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma, but I certainly would be more protective now. The FDA, this came out just as we were going off the air last Wednesday, is taking potential homeopathic drugs away from the store shelves. The FDA plans to go after homeopathic remedies that are unsafe for consumers and offer unproven benefits in the treatment of serious illness such as cancer and asthma. The proposal takes a firmer grip on homeopathic meds which are sold in the United States without proof they are safe and effective. People may be placing their trust and money in therapies that may be too little to benefit. Those drugs make up a growing price of nearly $3 billion in the market. So that claims to treat illnesses using substances that can cause similar symptoms in a healthy person. So they may include plants, even animal excretions. Many scientific studies have been found that those drugs are effective against cancer, dementia, ADHD, and a host of other conditions. The FDA has taken action against specific homeopathic products in the past, meaning ingredients which contain belladonna, which is poisonous, when associated with seizures and deaths. An intranasal cold remedy containing zinc was also found to cause cancer in some cases. Other remedies have contained a toxic substance called strychnine, which is often used in rat poison in higher doses. This isn't the first time homeopathic drugs have come under the FDA, so at which point the agency is not taking a strong enough stance on homeopathic medicines, and they're going to in the future. The FTC also put pressure on over-the-counter remedies when it announced it would wrap up the scrutiny of their safety and efficacy claims under deceptive advertising or labeling. So a lot of people, especially health experts, applaud the FDA's proposed crackdown on treatments they viewed largely as snake oil, However, the people, and I will tell you this, we sell some homeopathic meds. The people that believe in them really believe in them, and they have caused the huge increase in homeopathic medications. And if you have a health food store, I'm sure you see it even greater. The National Center for Homeopathy is a nonprofit based in New Jersey that works with industry partners, and they hope the action will not impede the access to homeopathic medicine. So if you're a homeopathic user, again, I have said this about over-the-counter medications per se. The United States does not require an over-the-counter product to be assayed and to you prove to them before you put it on the market what it has as far as ingredients and percentage of chemicals that are in that medication. Does not have to prove that. They can label it that it's in there. They can say it's 50% and it could be 10%. They're not tested. This all came about in the 1994 Natural Substance Act that allowed anything that was a natural ingredient to be put out on the market without having to identify the chemicals inside and the percentages of those chemicals, or prove that the bioavailability of those chemicals was something that you could depend on. So it's a changing world. It's a type of health care that many of us don't look forward to. Not just the pharmaceutical part of it, although we have very little trust in the efficacy of some of these products, and we have very little trust in an organization like CVS that buys the PBM, has the insurance company Anthem, and is the provider. So they're doing what they can to eliminate independent pharmacy from being successful in this kind of an environment. And as we start cutting dollars in health care, affordable health, now the Obama option is still getting a lot of reception, but it's no longer mandatory for people to take Obamacare, and they have other venues to take. The problem is the cost. The cost has gone up substantially, and if you're in one of those areas where you're having to put out an insurance amount of money for insurance that is prohibitive for your lifestyle, it becomes an option that maybe you can't afford, and then we become dependent upon the state and the federal government in order to put us in a position where we can make sure our family is protected. So with all the new diseases that are coming out and all the new medications that are coming out, we have to be more selective. We have to be more aggressive at fighting the insurance companies when they tell us they won't pay for it. When you're paying $400 a pill for something, you need to get that changed into something that's on the formulary. If you're going to a competitor of ours, Kmart or Safeway or CVS, Kmart has gone out of business, and we are doing your work for you. If you don't want to go to CVS, we call them, get your prescription transferred over to us. We deliver your prescription for free and do the transferring for you. So you no longer have to go to CVS to get it. So I'd like to remind you, we're Northlake Medical Pharmacies with 2 locations for you at 5136 Hill Road East across from Sutter Lakeside Hospital. Call us there at 263-6192, and outside the Bruno Shop Smart at 347 Lakeport Boulevard. Give us a call there at 263-1328. And Happy New Year, Paul.
Happy New Year!